welcome to this week's book club episode for Star Wars Catalyst by James Luceno. If you're not familiar with the series, basically we go through this book a couple of chapters at a time, looking at the themes and happenings and really getting into the nitty-gritty, just because we're taking a super close-up look at the book chapter by chapter. If this is your first time joining us, please check the description. You'll see the full playlist for this book as well as the other books we have done in this series. With that, today we are going to be discussing chapters 21 and 22, and this is going to round out part 2, which is called Pursuit of Peace. Let's jump into chapter 21, which is called Subgroups. We open back at Haas and Haas's main bar, and they're making a plan. He gets another run, even though his contact has been killed. Krennic has set him up with one more thing, which pretty much confirms that Krennic was behind everything with Haas. It's a big smuggler's party. A couple of cool things. One, there's a character named Zosad. It's Xosad. I don't know how you would pronounce it. But he will pop up in the novel Rebel Rising as well. So it's a kind of a cool crossover character. We see the character of Saw Gerrera for the first time in this novel. So here we're really getting into, hey look, it's our cast of characters from Rogue One. We have the Ursos, we have Krennic, we've had them the whole time, and now we're meeting Saw, and also just getting to see some other characters that come into play in other media, types of media, bits of media, other books that came out along this time. This is the classic, Haas is going for one more big score, the last big score. He's thinking that this is something that's kind of being tossed his way by Krennic under the guise of, here's your reward for being my stooge this whole time. Bring your friends. There's going to be plenty of money. As we see in these chapters, it's all a setup on Krennic's part, but it's also a setup on Haas's part, which makes what happens here make a little bit more sense. Because, reading through it, not knowing where it's going to end up in the next two chapters, and that Haas is aware that stuff is afoot and he always intended to double-cross the Empire. Saw's suspicion seems in character for what we know of Saw, right? He's very suspicious of everything in Rogue One. It also just seemed odd, like he's just invited and doesn't think the plan's gonna work, so why are you here, Saw? No one's saying you have to do it. But then it makes sense because Saw knows that they're going in to do some double crossing. It's just kind of cool to see him involved. There's references to things that happened in the Clone Wars, of course, which is where the character came from, with Saw and Stila Gerrera during the Onderon arc in season 4? It's later. It's also interesting to note that one of the companies they're going after here is Zerpin Industries, which is, of course, I think intentional on Krennic's part, either to get at Galen or just to know that they're manipulatable, malleable. They can be manipulated, and maybe just for a bit of keeping it personal too, I don't know. Then we cut over to Galen, who's waffling back and forth as to whether or not he's going to send his final message of how the weapon's going to work. This is the final moment. Even though he's told Krennic he would help, this is the point of no return. Yeah, he said he was going to help, but he could always go back on his word. This is the point where he's going to put the information's going to be out there in someone else's hands, and he will have decided if he's sticking to his pacifist morals or if he's going forward to protect Jyn and Lyra. And as he's thinking to himself, he is often thinking about his wife and daughter and how he's doing everything for them. And that's what he's telling himself. He doesn't want to be accused of doing this because he just wants to see how far he can push the science, because that goes so far against who he is, and insisting that he's doing this to protect Lyra and Jyn. And I wonder how much of that is... I mean, I'm sure he's doing it for Lyra and Jyn. I'm sure he's not making that up, and I'm sure he feels that conviction deep in his soul. But is that something that's actually allowing him to do this terrible thing that he never thought he'd do, which is to give in and test science for science sake, even if it's dangerous, and even if it could be used for war and tyranny? Or is that just a convenient side effect for what he's doing? But he also talks about the idea of the noble lie. Is there such a thing? He knows the implications of what he's about to do. He knows that the Jedi intentionally didn't want this. Is he going to break apart his family, trying to protect the very people who might leave him for him giving up his morals. It's just a lot of interesting questions. I think the idea of the noble lie to hide something, it's a question that's really easy to answer when you're on one side of the equation and harder to answer on the other side of the equation, right? It kind of goes down to the age-old should the Jedi have gone to war question, which I won't get into, but in the context of the Clone Wars. But we've done that as a whole streamcast, so if you want to know what I have to think about that, that's on the channel somewhere. If you search the channel, you know, it's easy to say, well, the Jedi should have stuck to their guns, as in don't stick to guns. But, you know, when you're responsible for the galaxy, it gets harder to answer that question, even if it's still true, right? It could still be true that the better option for Galen would be to not give his science away to the Empire. In fact, I think it is true that it was better for him to not give his science away to the Empire, and of course we know that because we know Krennic is lying to him, which is something that, you know, Galen could or could not possibly know. But when you're in that situation, it's different. When you have to realize that you will be personally responsible for the consequences of what's going on. And I don't really say that for a point, or it'll be like, apply that to this situation, and you know, it's just, a thing can be right. I feel like a lot of times people want to make the right decision the easy decision, when oftentimes the right decision is the hard decision, and I think it detracts from the importance of hard and right decisions to be like, well, it's clearly this. How could you not see that? You know, it's like, well, maybe they do see it, but it's difficult. And I think that's it. This is just an interesting place to put Galen. And this is a moment where he's such a complex character to me, because I love Galen as a character, and I love him played by Mads Mikkelsen in Rogue One, but he's not on the surface the most complex character. He's the science with morals who gets duped into doing bad science, and then wants to redeem himself for evils he's done accidentally or has allowed to happen through irresponsibility. But here is where he gets more complex. The idea of he went back on some belief system he had, and he has to wrestle with that. And again, I'm not saying that to a particular point. I'm just saying that as it's an interesting thing to think about, and I think a chapter like this is where I find Galen to be the most intriguing character. And I often find that with good guy characters, people who are not evil in any way, but could just be screwing up, could just be messing up. And I find that really interesting. And so that was something here with him that I thought was worth spending some time on. Tarkin goes to the planet of Salient, which is the planet that all the smugglers are heading to. Salient, I'm probably saying it wrong. He's going to the planet that all the smugglers are going to, with the attempt of using Haas's group to take down Zurpin. So not only are they trying to take over this world like they've done before, but the implication here is it seems like this world isn't really an Imperial world like a Legacy world would have been. This is an independent world, and they're using setting up Zurpin as a way to take that independent world. So that's obviously part of it, like I said with why Zurpin earlier, but I also think they could have picked any company, and they're picking Zurpin. So I still don't think it's completely a coincidence. But Zurpin is wise to it, either because they've seen the other things that are happening or because they're just savvy. And so they had no intention of ever taking in the smugglers. But of course, that's also because the smugglers had already gone to the planet and told the planet what was up. But the way this is all set up, obviously I'm talking about it because we've read all of the chapters, but the way these chapters set up the tension was done really well. I didn't necessarily remember that particular plot twist myself. I remembered that the smugglers got into a fight with the Imperials. I didn't really remember the play-by-play. So as I was rereading it and going, why is Saw acting like this? And man, Tarkin doesn't, like, what is up? And then you get to I really appreciated the tension for how things are going, even to the point where the end of this section of the chapter is Salient sticking up for its own sovereignty, and Tarkin, wants back up because he knows a fight is coming, and then you immediately go to Haas and you see that he's leaked the info, and you're like, oh, that's what's going on, and that he was always intent on crossing the Empire on this one last time. He talks about how his time with Lyra on Alpin is the name of the planet, the place where they were looking for the Kybers, really changed him. And he talks about how the smugglers would stand as the Empire tries to take autonomous worlds. And so it was cool. It just his interactions with Saw. You're seeing his character kind of come around from just the pilot to somebody who really wants to, I don't know that he's necessarily at least aware that he would be in it for, like, take it to the Empire, but he certainly wants to get back at what's been done to him, and I think he's growing to the point of wanting to get back for the sake of the galaxy. Then we go to, like, this weird maw of, like, 2 black hole nebula doohickeys, and it's Krennic, and he's test firing the weapon, and he gives, like, this really dramatic speech. Like, this is classic Krennic through and through. Like, I just see him there billowing. He probably has a cape already, and he's like, people are violent all the time, and so we need the things to be violent more. I love the idea that he does it. Like, it's so ridiculous and so extra, and I think it's amazing. Of course, the weapon works. I think it's interesting how he wishes he could show it to Galen without Galen completely freaking out. And I don't know if that's still just a misunderstanding of Galen or wanting to rub Galen's nose in it, But either way, he's excited. We finally have made the weapon, right? I've talked about how this whole time the station hasn't been the Death Star because they haven't been aware of what this was going to be, and we've hit that point. So this is the Subgroups chapter 21, where we kind of see everybody settling into what they're going to become. So then we hit chapter 22, Exit Wounds. Tarkin is still at the planet, and he wonders if this is all Krennic's doing, which I appreciate, because we had just, in the previous chapter, had Krennic thinking about how he had done all this to Tarkin, right? So there Krennic is thinking about how he had outplayed all of this, and he had a feeling Haas was going to react a certain way, and Tarkin was going to react a certain way, and things kind of go how they go, and Tarkin falls right into it and gets himself into a situation because he's not going to back down ever. And again, I love this for Krennic, because when you watch Rogue One, I mean, Tarkin really does come out on top every time. I mean, at the end of the day, Tarkin is just more ruthless. I think Tarkin really wants to take that power for power's sake, and specifically have, like, what others don't, where I think Krennic definitely wants powers that others don't have, but he's kind of in it for a different game, I feel like. And so it's good to see him be able to kind of play the way he plays. So here it's really nice to see Krennic kind of on his game and showing that he can actually be as smart as savvy as anyone else. It's just more of a, does he feel he needs to be kind of a situation? And ultimately, Tarkin just has the favor of the Emperor, right? In the way that Krennic is trying to earn, and that kind of is the disadvantage that he remains at when we get into Rogue One. But for the battle itself, the planet sends an ambassador, which is just a drone ship that's set to blow up. Warships show up, so Tarkin begins the fight. Meanwhile, Krennic is off getting a promotion, but I love that he has the gall to still be like, I still think that this rank is a better rank for me. I love how he pushes Masameda around, even though he also kind of plays it humble of like, oh, the Emperor's favor is all that he wants. I guess it's here he talks about how he was playing everybody against Tarkin, not the previous chapter. But, he thinks about that. He thinks about how he knew where Haas went the entire time. Haas thinks he got away with it. And Krennic was like, nah, I'm just kind of keeping that to myself. And how all of this has really kind of come around to where he can use Haas's guilt with Lyra to help him go after Tarkin's pride at a time he's finally whittled down Galen to make the weapon. So everything is really going Krennic's way at this point. We go back to Tarkin, who's in a full battle. Here he really knows for sure that this is all Krennic's doing, especially when he hears that Krennic got a promotion, which he presumes is because he finally made a breakthrough in the weapon. So Tarkin is now aware that Krennic is a true adversary, and it's time for him to make his move rather than just kind of keep playing him like his own stooge. Then we get to one of the creepiest chapters of the book. Krennic visits Lyra at a park. Lyra is now spending time away from Galen. They're not like in full argument mode, but they're still trying to kind of figure out what they are with each other right now. Krennic shows up and he tells her that he knows about her planetary visits, kind of creeps her out that he's been watching her. He pushes her with veiled threats, and he's trying to basically drive a wedge to make her nervous, to make her and Galen at odds. I mean, at this point, Lyra could be like, Krennic visited me and made me uncomfortable, and Galen would probably be like, why? He was just visiting. Anything she would say to speak about this Galen would kind of see a certain way. But Krennic makes it very clear to Lyra that, he's in charge and she needs to be concerned. It was an intense exchange between the two of them. I think some of the best stuff in this kind of Rogue One media block, be it the movie or this novel or anything else, is anything that involves Krennic and Lyra. That they are such opposing, at odds characters. I find them so interesting. But just to talk about part 2, Pursuit of Peace, for a second, where we kind of end up, the point, right, was pursuing peace, and we end with a super weapon being developed, a Grand Moff in a skirmish on an independent world, and a wife being estranged from her husband because somebody else has, driven this wedge. So, peace has been pursued, but it is truly the Imperial definition of peace. And that's where we're left going on into part 3, which is called Dead Reckoning. We will start Dead Reckoning, part 3, next week. Let's go ahead and read chapters 23 and 24. And that's where we will pick up. If you're not already, please follow us on all the socials. I'd love to talk with you guys more in other places. And with that, I will chat with you guys next week.